what does true leadership really look like today?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a world that just feels like it's constantly spinning, nonstop change, uncertainty, all these emotional challenges that really hit you. How do we lead when fear isn't just something, those we lead are feeling, but it's right there with us too?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And it's exactly what we're going to unpack in today's deep dive.
That's right. Today, we're really digging into the incredibly powerful insights from Brené Brown's Dare to Lead.
Mm.
And this isn't about the old school power stuff, top-down control.
No, not at all. This is about building genuinely brave work cultures. It's about leading with, as she says, whole hearts.
Mm.
And we've really spent some time with excerpts from this book, pulled out the most vital lessons, the surprising bits, those real aha moments. Our mission, really, for you listening, is to give you a kind of shortcut to understanding what it actually takes to lead this way. We want to explore how vulnerability isn't, some kind of weakness, but it's actually the path to courage, trust, and resilience in leadership.
And to really set the stage for her whole philosophy, let's go back to that great personal story she tells about speaking to C-level executives. And she initially thought C-level meant sea level, like, down-to-earth folks.
Right, which led to that sort of panic moment backstage at this big corporate event when she realizes she's surrounded by all these people in dark suits.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting there is how that mistake, that misunderstanding, actually highlights her core idea. That no matter the title, leaders are fundamentally people, people, people.
Exactly. Beneath the titles, the armor we all wear, we're just human. We have similar fears. We want connection.
And that little mantra she whispered to herself, people, 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 right before going on stage, it brought her back to that core idea. And it's such a good reminder for all of us, doesn't matter who you're leading.
That realization that we're all just people, 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 it really does set the stage, doesn't it? And maybe nowhere more clearly than in how she uses Theodore Roosevelt's Man in the Arena quote. You know the one?
Oh, yeah, it's powerful.
It is not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly.
And what's key there is how it frames vulnerability. It's the epigraph for her book, Daring Greatly, right? It's not about winning or losing guaranteed. It's about the courage just to show up when you can't control the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And that really hit home for leaders who, like Brown, face criticism just for putting themselves out there. That feeling of being on the line, maybe falling, but doing it anyway.
And what's really powerful, I think, beyond just the history of the quote, is how Brown makes us face that fear of judgment head on. It's like a reminder that real impact doesn't happen from the cheap seats.
Mm-hmm.
Often the loudest critics are doing the least.
Exactly.
So when we talk leadership, Brown defines a leader not by title, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's in anyone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and processes and who has the courage to develop that potential.
Mm.
Okay, but what happens when that kind of daring leadership isn't there? What does that look like in an organization? What are the signs?
Well, connecting this back, Brown points out several big problems that pop up when daring leadership is missing, like spending way too much time managing problematic behaviors after the fact instead of getting ahead of it, instead of dealing with the fears and feelings during change.
Right. And that second point you mentioned earlier about trust diminishing because there's no connection, that really hits home. How does a leader accidentally do that, even if they mean well?
Often it's avoiding the tough conversations, the uncomfortable stuff. When leaders don't lean into the emotional side of things with their teams, trust just erodes. Another thing she found is people get scared. Scared to take smart risks, scared to share bold ideas because they fear getting shot down or ridiculed if they fail.
So it breeds that status quo, that groupthink.
Exactly. It's not just stagnation, it's a real fear of innovation. And, organizations get stuck in setbacks. They waste energy on reassurance or blame instead of just cleaning up the mess and learning from it.
Yeah, the blame game.
Right. Too much shame and blame, not enough real accountability and learning. And this is crucial. People opt out of important conversations, like around diversity and inclusion, because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing.
It's easier to just stay quiet.
Mm-hmm. It paints a really clear picture of what's missing when that daring leadership isn't there.
So what I find really groundbreaking in Brown's work is this idea that courage isn't just something you have or you don't. It's actually a collection of 4 skill sets. things you can learn, practice, even measure. Rumbling with vulnerability, living into our values, braving trust, and learning to rise.
And that raises a really important question, right? Why is rumbling with vulnerability the first one, the foundational one?
Yeah, why start there?
Because without it, the other three just don't work. You can't put them into practice. Our ability to be daring leaders is directly tied to our capacity for vulnerability. It's really the core.
Okay, so let's tackle some of those myths that get in the way, the things that stop us from embracing vulnerability. Myth, #1. Vulnerability is weakness.
Right. And she really busted this myth powerfully when she worked with military special forces soldiers. She asked them, what's the toughest part of your job? And it wasn't the technical stuff, keeping shit from falling from the sky, as they put it. It was leading the team and all the people stuff. That meant hard conversations, emotional exposure, asking for help. It took immense vulnerability. There's that quote from Madeleine Langlois, "To grow up is to accept vulnerability." There's just zero empirical evidence that vulnerability equals weakness. Actually, it's the opposite.
It sounds like it takes real inner strength, actually, not a lack of it. Okay, what about the next one? The idea that you can just power through alone. Myth, #3, I can go it alone.
Yeah, the lone wolf idea. It's a defense mechanism, right? A kind of armor. But when you're facing real problems, like holding people accountable for ethics, that takes huge vulnerability. You just can't do that alone. Brown saw this with bankers in London. Their big issue was ethical decision-making. And she basically said, look, if you don't do vulnerability, if your culture thinks it's weakness, no wonder ethics is a problem.
So the solution was actually in the vulnerability.
Exactly. Recognizing we need each other.
Okay, this next one feels like a classic chicken and egg thing for a lot of people. Myth, #5. Trust comes before vulnerability. Like, how do you trust enough to be vulnerable? Or how do you build trust without being vulnerable first?
Yeah, it's a common question, but the research is really clear. We need to trust to be vulnerable, and we need to be vulnerable in order to build trust.
So they build on each other.
Exactly. It's reciprocal, woven together. Trust isn't built in one big moment. It's slow, it's iterative, it's layered, built in those small moments.
Yeah.
Brown tells that lovely story about her daughter, Ellen, and the marble jar, remember?
Oh, yeah.
Trust gets built by tiny gestures. A friend remembering all 8 grandparents' names, or just, making half the seat available at a crowded lunch table.
So it's not the grand gestures. It's the consistent small things that build that foundation. And it's interesting, this isn't just leadership. It echoes John Gottman's research on relationships too, right?
Spot on. Gottman's work on sliding door moments. It aligns perfectly. It's about consistently choosing to turn toward connection, even in tiny ways, like asking your partner what's wrong when they look sad instead of just ignoring it. Those small choices build trust bit by bit.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, here's a really crucial one that gets misunderstood all. Myth, #6. Vulnerability is disclosure. Is being vulnerable just like oversharing everything, telling everyone all your secrets?
No, absolutely not. That's a huge misconception. Indiscriminate disclosure or just being vulnerable for the sake of it, that is not daring leadership. Psychological safety, feeling safe to take risks, be vulnerable, admit mistakes without punishment, that's key. Google's Project Aristotle found that, right? It's about feeling safe.
Right.
But fake vulnerability, where you can tell someone has an agenda, that breeds distrust immediately. Trying to manipulate people with pretend vulnerability, that backfires fast.
You definitely see that sometimes. Someone thinks they're being vulnerable, but it feels off, like they want something out of it, not just connection.
Exactly. Brown tells a story about a young CEO. He wanted to get really vulnerable by confessing all his past failures to his investors and team. But it highlights the danger of what she calls stealth intentions or stealth expectations. Using vulnerability to protect yourself, like thinking, oh, they won't blame me if they know I'm trying hard.
So it's performative.
Right. Real vulnerability needs clear intention and boundaries. It's not a manipulation tactic.
Okay, so if vulnerability is the foundation, what's our compass? What guides us when things get tough? Brown really emphasizes that our values are our North Star in those moments.
Yeah, and it's not just saying you have values, it's about practicing them, aligning your intentions, your words, your thoughts, your actions with what you truly hold important. She suggests picking just 1 or 2 core values because, as Jim Collins said, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have no priorities.
Right, focus.
Those core values then become a filter for everything else. And the key then is to define, okay, what are 3 or 4 specific behaviors that support this value? And what are 3 or 4 slippery behaviors that undermine it, that makes it real, actionable?
And she has a personal behavior tied to her value of courage. Something about discomfort.
She does. Her behavior is don't choose silence over what is right.
Mhm.
And she learned that the intense discomfort you feel in those daring moments, it often only lasts about 8 seconds.
8 seconds.
Yeah. She jokes, we can do anything for 8 seconds. It's a playful nod to a George Strait song, but it powerfully makes the point. Choose courage over comfort, even if it's just for those few really hard seconds.
That's a great practical takeaway. Makes being brave feel more manageable somehow. So how do our values show up in maybe the most challenging leadership task?
Yeah.
Giving and receiving feedback. Because that's where the rubber really meets the road, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And Brown gives us a really practical feedback readiness checklist for daring leaders. It includes things like sit next to the person, not across from them, put the problem in front of both of you, not between you.
Creates collaboration.
Exactly. Be ready to not fully understand, stay curious. Acknowledge the good stuff before jumping into criticism. Hold accountable without shame or blame. Be open to owning your part.
Owning your part, that's big.
Huge. Thank them for their effort. Don't just critique the outcome. Connect the challenge to growth. And, maybe most importantly, model the vulnerability you expect.
Okay, and when you're the one getting the feedback, when it's coming your way, what's the mindset shift there?
The internal mantra is something like, I'm brave enough to listen, or, okay, there's probably something valuable here, take what works, leave the rest. Brown is clear. Mastery in anything requires feedback. It's a vulnerable act for both people involved.
Okay, so trust. We know it's crucial. How do we build it concretely, like step by step? Brown created the breathing inventory, right? That really useful acronym for the 7 elements of trust.
Yeah, it's fantastic because it makes trust something tangible, measurable, actionable. It's a great tool for conversations, especially when trust feels shaky. You can pinpoint where the breakdown might be.
Okay, let's break it down. BRAVING.
Right. B is for boundaries. Respecting others' boundaries, setting your own, being willing to say no. R is reliability. Doing what you say you'll do, and being aware of your limits so you don't overpromise and underdeliver.
That's key, being realistic.
Totally. A is accountability. Owning your mistakes, apologizing genuinely, making amends. V is the vault. Not sharing information that isn't yours. Keeping confidences, and this includes not doing that counterfeit connection thing through gossip. Huge trust breaker, gossip.
Oh yeah, instantly erodes trust.
I is integrity. Choosing courage over comfort. Doing what's right, not what's fun, fast, or easy. Practicing your values. She suggests having an integrity partner to help you stay aligned.
Interesting idea.
N is non-judgment. Asking for what you need without judging yourself and letting others do the same. Recognizing that asking for help is strength, not weakness. And finally, G is generosity. Extending the most generous interpretation possible to what others say and do, assuming positive intent.
Assuming positive intent.
Yeah.
Like that story about the officer at West Point.
Exactly. The move the rock story. Instead of blaming a struggling subordinate, he assumed the person was doing their best but maybe in the wrong role, and found a way to move the rock, reassigning him where he could succeed. That's generosity in action.
That's such a powerful framework. But it makes me wonder, how can we really trust other people if we don't first trust ourselves? Doesn't it start there?
It absolutely does. That's a critical point. Self-trust is built the same way, applying those braving elements to how you treat yourself. Making small, doable promises to yourself and keeping them. That's how you fill your own marble jar. Like Brown says, you can't give away what you don't have. If you don't trust yourself, it's really hard to extend genuine trust to others.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the concepts, the framework. Let's hear about some real-world examples. Who's actually done this, put these ideas into practice, and dared greatly?
Yeah, great examples. First, Stefan at Old Navy. He took over a culture that was really fearful, very hierarchical. He physically moved teams into an open, glass-walled room, and he started reframing failures as learnings, systematically removing that fear of messing up.
Wow, a physical change and a language change.
Right. It built trust, encouraged teamwork, and ultimately allowed them to outlearn and outperform competitors. It was a tangible shift driven by vulnerability and accountability.
Okay, who else?
Then there's Dr. Sanay Bell, a junior high principal. She built this incredibly supportive school environment partly by being vulnerable herself. She shared her own story of overcoming challenges. She worked on her own self-awareness using journaling and feedback, and then she initiated tough conversations about things like academic disparities, equity issues, what she called culture killers. Her vulnerability empowered her staff.
So her modeling it opened the door.
Precisely. And one more. Brent Ladd, from Purdue University. He had this personal not enough fear about an unfinished PhD. He bravely presented his research anyway, even feeling like an outsider. And he worked on building trust with colleagues by seeing them as people, doing the best they could. It transformed his work relationships.
Oh, so?
Well, he even let go of control over a workshop he usually ran, letting a colleague co-chair and bring in her own ideas. That's demonstrating trust in a really concrete way.
Okay, so if we dare greatly, if we step into that arena, we will fall sometimes. That seems inevitable, right? Part of the deal. So what's the skill set for getting back up? Because that feels just as important as the daring itself.
Absolutely critical. And Brown argues leaders need to be trained in these rising skills before they fall, not just scrambling afterwards. She compares it to teaching skydivers how to land while they're falling. Not ideal. This resilience process, she calls it learning to rise, has 3 parts: the reckoning, the rumble, and the revolution.
Okay, let's start with the reckoning. What's that about?
This is about recognizing when we get emotionally hooked. You know that feeling? That intense, sometimes physical reaction to difficult emotions?
Yeah.
The reckoning is noticing that hook and then getting curious about it instead of just reacting.
Instead of lashing out or shutting down?
Exactly. Because too often, instead of just feeling the emotion, we offload it onto others. Brown talks about common ways we do this, like chandeliering, stuffing hurt down until some tiny thing makes us explode in rage or tears. Often happens in power imbalances.
Yeah, I think we've all seen that. Or done it.
Or bouncing hurt. Choosing anger or blame instead of feeling the underlying pain. The ego kind of uses anger and blame as bouncers at the door of our heart, right, to keep the hurt out.
It's a great image. What else?
Then there's numbing hurt, using anything, food, work, booze, scrolling social media, just to take the edge off. But the problem is, you cannot selectively numb emotion. If you numb the bad stuff, you numb the good stuff too. Joy, love, connection.
Cuts you off from everything.
Right. You also see stockpiling hurt. Just collecting resentments and pain until your body basically forces a shutdown. Anxiety, depression, burnout. And Umbridge, like the Harry Potter character, masking real pain with that fake, overly sweet positivity. It actually creates distrust because it feels fake.
Because nobody feels relentlessly cheerful all the time.
Right. And finally, high centering. Feeling totally stuck, powerless. Like that image she uses of a cow stuck on a fence, can't go forward, can't go back.
Okay, so we recognize these patterns in ourselves. What are the practical strategies for actually doing the reckoning? How do we manage those hooked moments?
Well, one powerful tool is tactical breathing, or box breathing. Inhale for 4, hold 4, exhale 4, hold 4. It actually helps rewire your physiological response to stress. Also, just practicing calm. Calm is contagious. It's a leadership superpower. Really helps manage anxiety in yourself and others, and sometimes just giving yourself permission slips. Literally writing down permission to feel anxious or permission to be imperfect today, especially if you're not used to letting yourself feel things.
Permission slips. I like that. Okay, so after the reckoning, acknowledging the emotion, we enter the rumble. Go into the mat with our stories, she says. This sounds like the hard part.
It can be.
Right.
Because there's this universal truth Brown talks about. In the absence of data, we will always make up stories.
Always.
Just always. Our brains crave coherence. They actually give us a little dopamine hit for making sense of things, even if the story we create isn't accurate. The brain wants simple answers, good guy, bad guy. It hates uncertainty.
Wow. So our brains are wired to create narratives, even false ones, just to feel better. That explains a lot.
It really does. And that first story we tell ourselves in a difficult moment, that's what Brown calls the shitty first draft, or SFD.
SFD.
It's that immediate, fear-based, often incomplete story. It might be full of blame, really immature, just a rant, but writing it down gives you power over it. You get it out of your head and on the paper. Otherwise, these SFDs can turn into conspiracy theories, fear plus imagined data or confabulations, which are like lies told honestly. You fill in the gaps, but it's not true. And that can be really damaging, especially at work.
Could you give an example?
Yeah, she tells her own story, the ham fold-over debacle. She was super stressed, snapped at her husband about how he folded lunch meat. Her SFD was this whole narrative about how he must be sick of her stress, judging her lack of organization.
And the real story.
He was just hungry and tired and folded it the fastest way possible. It was a real eye-opener for her about her own patterns of offloading stress and her difficulty asking for help. So the key in the rumble is to capture that SFD and then ask yourself, okay, the story I'm making up is... And then you challenge it. What more do I need to learn? What assumptions am I making? What's my part in this?
Really interrogating that first reaction. So the final stage, after reckoning and rumbling, is the revolution. What does that mean? What's the outcome?
The revolution is about reclaiming authorship of your story. When we own our stories, the falls, the failures, the hurts, we get to rate the ending. If we deny them, if we skip the reckoning and the rumble, then those stories own us. So owning your story is the ultimate act of courage. It's a rebellion against letting fear and shame define you.
Wow. What a powerful arc. Okay, let's try and bring this all together for you, our listener.
Yeah.
It's been quite a journey through Dare to Lead. So, key takeaways. Daring leadership isn't magic. It's built on these 4 teachable skills. Rumbling with vulnerability,
Living into our values
braving trust.
and learning to rise.
And absolutely central to all of it is understanding that vulnerability is the foundation. It's not weakness, it's actually the source of real strength and connection.
That's right. And getting clear on your core values gives you that compass, that North Star to guide your actions, especially when things are tough.
And trust. It's not automatic. It's built actively in those small, consistent, braving moments, both with other people and maybe even more importantly, with yourself. That self-trust piece is huge.
Absolutely. And finally, resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It comes from learning to rise, reckoning with the emotions, rumbling with the stories we tell ourselves, and finding our way back to integrity after we fall.
So as you think about all this, maybe try making your own joy and meaning list. What truly brings you joy and meaning? And compare that to how you usually define success. It's a good reminder that time, it's the one thing we can't get more of. It's not for sale. True joy often comes from that alignment with values and purpose, not just getting more stuff or titles.
Well said. And maybe a final thought to leave you with, building on Joseph Campbell's wisdom. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Dare to enter that cave.
Yeah.
In your life, in your leadership. Choose courage over comfort. Use whole hearts over armor. And choose that great adventure of being brave and afraid, often at the exact same time.